saw handed down this morning in those comments by Peter Shergold. Let's talk about sports washing in the meantime. That is on the agenda. And what is it, you ask? Well, climate activists are accusing fossil fuel companies of using sponsorship as a way to make their companies more socially acceptable. Australian cricket captain Pat Cummins boycotted the governing body's partnership with Alinta Energy, and now Fremantle Dockers fans are calling for their club to drop the Woodside Energy sponsorship, saying having a fossil fuel company as a major sponsor is no longer appropriate. Joining me live now is the Shadow Minister for Resources, Susan McDonald. Susan, thanks so much for your time. Where does this stop? Where's the line? What is now an acceptable company for sponsorship?
Well, that's a point well made, and it is absolutely crazy to see this virtue signalling from sports stars. I mean, sport is a national pastime in this country, but it doesn't happen through only good wishes. And I know that in regional Australia in particular, sporting groups, netball, others, are desperate to find funding bodies. They apply for grants, they hold chook raffles and barbecue fundraisers. And so particularly for Hancock Prospecting to fund $15 million to bail out Netball Australia, which was broke, $7 million worth of debt, to enable this very popular sport to not only keep going, but to allow the best in that field to stop work, or at least to be subsidised, to train, to be the best in the world. And other energy providers that somehow we have stopped understanding that is traditional energy generation that allows us to have the first world lifestyle that we have. And I'm looking forward to seeing if the Treasurer is going to pick up on this and say that somehow the over $40 billion worth of royalties and company taxes paid for by resource companies, whether or not we're too good for that and that we don't want to accept their money, because it is resources that makes Australia go round.
Yeah, sure. The list of unacceptable companies, according to some of these activists, is growing quite long. It used to be alcohol and tobacco. It's now gambling companies. It's resource companies. I mean, can you even identify a company that doesn't fit those categories, that can afford to or is willing to sponsor some of these multi-million-dollar teams?
Well, that's exactly right. That is the point, is that, these are community events. Sporting bodies represent mums and dads who take kids to sporting fields and ovals and stadiums right across the country every weekend and during the week. It is people like Mrs. Reinhardt, like these other companies, who are putting their hands in their pockets and allowing these things to happen. Where we got too good for support for these important events, I have no idea. But I mean, the logical step for the next step is that the athletes will be saying, well, sports fans, don't sit down on plastic seats. We obviously can't wear sports boots. We can't use drink bottles made of metals or plastics. We can't play under stadium lights that are generated by traditional energy providers. We certainly can't fly in a jet. We can't travel in a diesel-powered bus. I mean, the list becomes endless and mindless. I just think it's devastating that for normal Australians who understand the realities of how Australian jobs and industry are generated, how we keep the lights on, how we have the first world lifestyle that we have. It is a function of resource industries, and they're the ones who mine critical industries, who mine critical minerals, who mine rare earths, all the things that are so important for this new economy. But somehow we're too good for them. It's crazy.
It is a little bit, I must admit, Susan McDonald. And I look at this debate at the moment where we're looking at energy crisis. Essentially, we were almost having blackouts on the East Coast because there wasn't enough gas just a couple of months ago. We have politicians, independents, including Labor, saying that we need to quarantine more gas here in Australia to ensure that there is that transition fuel there. But at the same time, these companies aren't good enough to be sponsors of major sporting teams. I mean, where does this end? I mean, there was some suggestion that perhaps the government should just step in, so all sports are covered by taxpayer funds.
But this is the craziness of it, is that taxpayer funds are generated from royalties, from company taxes and from the PAYG taxes of well-paid Australians who pay tax. So if the government was to start paying sporting bodies, well, they would have to take it out of the very taxes and royalties that are paid for by resource companies. So it makes no sense at all that Australia should be talking about energy transitions, and this is the great lie of the renewable industry, is that they are saying that there is no cheaper electricity than from renewables. They're saying that we can transition to a completely renewable of generated electricity 82% by 2030, according to Labor.
Yeah.
And yet we know that that's not true, because it is baseload firming electricity from traditional energy sources that allows us to do this. And we've already had blackouts in South Australia. AEMO has said that that will happen again next year. We will see the same thing in Victoria and New South Wales, because we're not generating enough additional electricity to provide for the electrification of households and businesses. So the signals we're sending to resource companies about we don't want you, we're too good for you, be clear. Their boards right around the world are making decisions about where they'll invest their money and their projects next. And Australia is sending a signal that we're suddenly too good for them. And I don't think that's right.
Susan McDonald, thanks.